welcome back. Third subject we're going to talk about with Scott Aspelin, our financial coach, is about debt. Many in our culture, many pastors and leaders that I know go into debt for sometimes even very good reasons. How do you start a conversation with people about debt?
Yeah, it's really common conversation topic because, like you said, it is so common in our U.S. American culture. It's just become normal almost. And sometimes we have to, as you might imagine, as we've been talking about in some of the other videos, we have to step back a little bit and get to some of the emotions and feelings about it. So one way that people don't usually think about this, but that one way to think about debt, just to kind of jar people a little bit, is a simplistic way to describe it is debt is, you could say, it's no more than impatience expressed in dollars and cents. So let that sink into our viewers a little bit. But some people might be getting a little defensive right now. Like, well, I'm not impatient. No, debt. I'm doing it wisely. This kind of thing. Again, just evaluate to see if the reason you would go into debt essentially is because you don't have the money already. So you're choosing to take a loan out from somebody else who has the money. Another way to look at it is also interest is a penalty if you're going into debt. That is the cost of taking out that debt. People say, oh, okay, yeah, I know that. But it is, they don't think of it as a penalty, but it really kind of is. If you don't have the money saved, your penalty for not having that saved is now you have to pay this extra interest rate to use somebody else's money. Now, that other person who's loaning you the money, to them, the interest rate is a reward because they have the money. That may be an institution. I'm saying person. Typically, it's some financial institution, but just it's good to kind of just think about it a little bit and say, okay, have I been impatient with wanting things or saying I need things, and has that led me down a path to where I was now going into, whether it was a credit card or a car loan that was more or not at the right time? Was there impatience involved in some of those decisions? And again, it's going to take a little bit of honest reflection sometimes, and then again, as we adjust our thoughts going forward.
So this is a powerful perspective. Impatience for expressed in dollars and cents, debt, and also a penalty for using someone else's money. There are many reasons and times that we go into debt. Are you saying that going into debt is always bad?
No, I'm not always saying it's bad. It's obviously a strong word. Never and always, but it is a very personal choice. I'm probably a voice that'll be a little different than the marketing in our country right now. There's no lack of people who will tell you how to get into debt and how to what additional debts to get. There's not a lot of voices of people telling you, okay, let's think about all the ways before we get into the debt. And I'm probably more of that voice where, okay, let's look at this. Is this a healthy thing for you and your family, perhaps, to go into a debt? Some people say, oh, I can manage my debt. And yes, there are some who they have some debts, they pay them off, and it doesn't damage their life. It doesn't start taking them down a path. I fully recognize there's some people like that. It's becoming less and less common in our culture because we are always bombarded with marketing messages on our device, our phones, iPads, billboards, TV, sidebar, whatever. They're all watching us. I'm not trying to be conspiracy, but they all know what we're doing, right? And these companies, I'm not calling them evil, they have to market to be in business. That's just normal. I have to market people to coach. It's our choice as to who we're going to engage with and use our hard-earned money and purchase things with. But they're all coming at us, and sometimes we get numb to it almost, and just things, we may get numb to the fact of, well, credit card debt is normal, or I'm going to always have a car payment. Why is that weird? Well, there's ways to not have that. But it's contrary to what some of the some of the marketing and some of the merchants in our culture will have you believe, because they're going to, we talked about in the last video, they're going to be pushing maybe convenience and deserve, those kind of things. They're going to push convenience because they say it's convenient. You can charge that thing right now, as one example. You can get that car right now. We'll get you in a loan. You drive off that lot. You'll feel good about yourself, right? And so it's those kind of things that are coming at us, and we think, oh well, it's just this debt, and what happens is we start to think only in monthly payments. And I call that broken thinking, is because if you're only thinking in monthly payment, I want people to think in total cost. So whether if they're evaluating whether a particular debt is reasonable for their family, think about the total cost. Okay, it's going to be this many payments over this many years, and here's what let's just use a vehicle loan for an example. We'll just say the vehicle loan is going to cost $20,000. Well, if I pay for it in cash, obviously it's $20,000. If I do it over this many years at this interest rate, it's going to be obviously an amount well above 20,000. But different merchants will have ways of saying, oh, well, we can, well, how much can you afford? And they want you to start thinking monthly payment. I was recently in a car dealership, and on the person's debt, there's a card, like a postcard size. It was basically a fill in the blank. How much can you afford? And it had big smiley faces on it, happy. They don't even have to ask you. It's in front of you now. So I like to challenge people to think when we start talking about debt, is stepping back. Why am I going into this debt? Could I do it a different way? Is this debt healthy, or is it started to run away with me? Like in those examples we gave in one of the previous videos, is did I have an emergency? Maybe it was a true emergency, and then I wasn't able to pay off, and then I started putting more things on it because I got to get little Johnny and Susie some school clothes, and I got to do this, and I need to do this. And did we keep putting stuff on there that now started running away with it? So I just like to have that healthy perspective to start the discussion.
So Scott, you mentioned you want us to think not about the monthly cost. And so many things are about a monthly subscription or a monthly cost. And my brain, given the culture, thinks that way. Why is it that you want me to think about the entire or total cost as opposed to the monthly cost?
Yeah, and that's a great point because most of our financial rhythms in our life are monthly. We pay bills generally monthly. The
Paycheck comes in monthly.
Comes in monthly or twice a month,
right.
But you only pay a mortgage payment typically once a month. Your electric bill comes once a month. So we're already kind of down that path already, and like I said, the financial rhythms are already lined up that way in most of our culture. There's nothing wrong with that. So what happens then is the marketers figured out in some of these circumstances is, I could ask you, or someone could say, well, do you want to buy this music service? Let's just say, I'm not going to use any names, but you could have this music service for $250 this year. And you say, well, that's $250. I don't want to spend that. Well, if they say, well, it's how about $20 a month? You're like, oh, I can do that. When they break it, they can break it down sometimes in a smaller, manageable chunk that we can think about. And there's a we can think about the car example. Going into a car dealership, like I said before, they'll have that little card, or they'll just straight up ask you, how much can you afford? What can you afford each month? And they will adjust your car note to fit your monthly payment of what you say you can afford to them. So what they're tapping into is, if someone says, well, I can't afford, you walk into a dealership and they say, well, this car is going to be $30,000. The person's thinking, again, I've read some studies on this, where you're now emotionally deflated. Like, I don't have $30,000. Well, then they come at you and they say, well, how could you afford $400 a month? I could do that. Well, now you're okay. Yeah, I can do that. And now you're rolling out of that dealership, and they've come at you with, well, here's your monthly payment, instead of looking at it and saying, okay, this is now going to be 8 years at this interest rate, this many payments now, and what's my total cost at the end of that? The car costs $30. Here's what my total cost is after all the interest is added on. I've paid it all off at the point. Now you've also got a scenario of, so that car is going to be much more expensive over that time. Again, doesn't mean the car dealership's evil. They're just saying, we want to get this person, their objective is to get you in that car. And they're going to come at you with what they think is a solution. And a lot of people go for that. So it doesn't mean that you're a bad person if you take out a loan. It just means you need to evaluate, is this going to be effective in my budget? So an alternative, let's say in the car example, might be, well, I'm going to negotiate only on the total price of this car. So I'm going to only talk total price with this individual that I'm working with at the car place or whoever you're dealing with. And then you may have already talked to your financial institution if you said, well, I really need to do a car loan. Okay. And you could come in with, you already have a rate and a loan set up to go. And you already know that. And then I'm going to negotiate, I'm going to get the best price on this car, period. I'm not going to let them move a shell game of, well, they can do their financing and this and that. I just want to know total cost. So that's maybe one way to do it. You come in with a different thing. And they may say, oh, we've got a promo, you can get 0% interest. It's pretty rare these days, but I've heard of it. Well, that's a no-brainer, but you're like, okay, Scott, that's a super easy one. How about a more challenging one? But again, it's just thinking along those lines of, is this monthly payment, how much does that add up to over a year? How much does this car note add up to over the 6, 7, or 8 years now that how long am I going to be upside down on this particular car? Let's say I need to sell this car in 3 years. You may still be upside down on an 8-year note in 3 years at the rate of depreciation for vehicles. It's again, it's a factor to keep in mind and think about.
Okay, that's helpful to think about the whole and to see, not be fooled by just what I happen to be paying each month. Let's go to solutions. So I have some debts, we have some debts. How do I get started? How do I get out of debt?
Let's say someone has a handful of debts. Let's say there's some credit card debt. That's a common one to have a couple of credit cards and have some balances on those. Then you may have a car note, you may have a mortgage. What we're going to do is I like to use this again. This is not Scott's only theory. This is out there, but I like to use the debt snowball method, and I'll describe what it is. If you can picture making a snowball, those in the southern climates, you just work with me. You start with a little bit of snow, and then you roll it in the snow, and it keeps packing more and more on, so you get this bigger, almost like you're making a snowman. You can make a big snowball at that point. It just keeps growing on itself. So what you're going to do with the debt snowball method is you're going to first list out each debt you have in order of smallest balance down to the biggest balance. This is the remaining balance to pay. So usually your credit cards will be the lower ones. They may be, $1,000, a few thousand. A home mortgage is generally going to be at the bottom of that particular list. So the reason you want to do that now with the debt, I'll tell you in a minute the reason. You want to list those out, and then you'll have the monthly payments out next to it. But you're only listing it in order of the balance. So you're gonna start by saying, okay, I'm gonna pay the minimum balance on every debt except that smallest one. And this links back to our budget discussion. If in your budget you said, okay, now that I've got my emergency fund, I've got that buffer. Now the next goal, when you're writing those goals on the top of your budget sheet, next goal is I'm gonna start paying off debt. I'm gonna start that debt snowball. So let's say you say, I'm going to budget an extra 100, an extra 200, whatever the number is for you and your family. I'm putting that in my budget, and I'm going to pay that extra on debt. But I'm starting with that smallest balance. Let's say it's $1,000 credit card. Well, you're going to start pounding that extra. The minimum payment may only be $20 a month, but you're going to be paying off for a long time at $20. So I'm adding that extra amount on there, month after month. And then when that one's paid off, you take that, let's say it was $100 and it was $20 minimum. Now that $120 you were paying, you roll that into the next one and you add it to its minimum. That's where that snowball effect comes in. And the reason we start with that small one, because some people say, well, shouldn't I start with the biggest interest rate?
Biggest interest rate, right.
Another common question. I like the snowball method because, again, linking back to the emotional side, we need those victories. It could be your highest interest rate could be like a student loan, for example. I don't know. It depends on the only one they have. Well, that could be a big chunk, and you could be chipping away at that for a long time. You want to have that victory and then start that snowball to the next one. So again, you'll be surprised. There's been studies by other people who are smarter than me, but they look at it with groups and how you're paying off those debts and which ones actually get as far as get it done quicker, and which quicker paying it off means more money for you. Because then after you've done that snowball and paid off those debts, you know what? Now that snowball payment can go into savings. And that's where the power of getting out of debt, then in that next step, maybe you want to build a bigger emergency fund. Maybe you need to start saving for the next car, saving for retirement, whatever it is, or any combination. And by the time they've paid those off, that snowball is, again, several $1,000s. Now, that can make some real progress towards their savings goals, which is what everybody really wants to get to.